My name is Theresa, and I had my abortion over 50 years ago. It was pre-Roe versus Wade, but legal in the state of New York. I was 17 years old when I became pregnant. I slept with my boyfriend, not because I was in love, but because it was the 60s, the Woodstock generation, and free love, free sex, that was the thing then. And I remember thinking that there was something wrong with me because I hadn't had sex. And so I decided to sleep with this person. When I found out that I was pregnant, I was in a chair in my parents' house, and I called up the doctor's office, and he told me that my test result was positive. And I just remember a whole wide range of feelings going through me, from feeling almost happy that I had a baby inside of me to being completely terrified. I grew up in an Italian-American Catholic family, and I was terrified. I was terrified to tell my parents that I was pregnant. And so I kept hiding my pregnancy. And I went over like a million different scenarios in my head about what would happen when I told them. The one thing that I was never worried about was abortion. Because we were Catholic, I just didn't think that that would ever be an option. And so I delayed and delayed and delayed. I told the father of the baby, and he said that he would marry me. And so I was just putting off the inevitable as far as telling my parents. At that time, you wore peasant shirts, so it was very easy to hide the pregnancy. And when I finally did tell them, I got a very different response from the one that I thought that I would get. My father got up off of his chair, told me that to forget that I was his daughter, and he was going to forget that I was his daughter, and that I should leave the house. And I just remember grabbing a few things and leaving and being in such shock that this was happening, because this wasn't one of the scenarios that went through my head. I called a friend to come and pick me up, and she did. And another friend's mother told me that I could stay with them for a while. All I really remember about that period was feeling very, very isolated and alone. I started fighting with the father of the baby because of all the stress that was around me, and I told him to leave me alone. And him being, a teenager himself, he was happy to do that. My dad started having one of my sisters call me every day to ask me what I was going to do. He wanted me to have an abortion. He said that he would pay for it. And she would call me up and say, well, what are you going to do? You have no job, you have no money, you have no place to go. How are you going to take care of this baby? And every day I would just say to her, I don't know how I'm going to take care of it, but I'm not going to have an abortion. And this went on day after day after day after day, until finally I said that I would have an abortion, not because it was a free choice or because it was something that I wanted, but because I felt like I had no choice. By the time I actually had the abortion, because I was towards the end of my 4th month of pregnancy, my abortion was in a hospital. I don't remember anyone speaking to me about what I was going to go through or the development of my baby or anything. I just remember being in this room in the hospital, which was actually on the maternity ward, and just going through the motions because I felt like I had no other choice but to go through the motions. The doctor came into the room, and I ended up having a saline abortion. If anybody doesn't know what that is, they inject your abdomen with saline, and what it does is it burns the baby to death. And no one told me the development of my baby. Nobody told me anything that was going to happen to me. Nobody told me what a saline abortion did. And so I was a 17-year-old kid in the hospital room by herself. The doctor came in, and I just remember looking at him and feeling like he was so sadistic. And he came in and he injected my abdomen with saline solution. I often, there's parts of it, honestly, that I still don't remember. It was so traumatic. But I do remember feeling thrashing around inside of me, which later on I found out was actually my baby dying, burning to death. And in this process, my sister started calling me and asking me if the abortion was over. And I remember I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what I was doing or what was going on for me. And I kept saying to her, I don't know what's going on. And hour after hour after hour went by. I was in labor for many, many hours. until I actually gave birth to a dead baby boy. I remember looking down at him after it happened and just seeing his little hands and his feet and just thinking like, oh my God, what did I do? And I remember wanting to pick him up and put him back inside of me, but obviously I couldn't. And then the other thought I remember is that I wanted to jump out the window, but I didn't have the courage to do it. And so I rang for the nurse, and she came into the room, and she had this big plastic jar with her, and on the front of it in black magic marker it said 3A. And she picked up my son and she tossed him in the jar and she walked out of the room. To say my life changed after that is an understatement. I couldn't believe that I had done it, and I couldn't even believe that it was something that was allowed. I remember going home from the abortion. I actually stayed overnight, I guess because of the kind of abortion that it was. And I remember going back to my friend's house after, the people I was staying with. And I remember all my other friends were there. And it was like everybody's life was going on. And I had this traumatic event that had just happened to me. They were partying and drinking. And I just remember trying to get as drunk as I could because I couldn't even believe what I had done. Even though I had the abortion, I still wasn't welcomed back into the family. So here I had caved into the pressure and terminated my pregnancy, and I still was outside of the family. Dave Reardon from the Elliott Institute, where they do post-abortion research, he says that many women are socially aborted before they ever step foot into an abortion clinic. And that's just the way that I felt. I felt like I had been separated from everybody that I thought loved me. I was isolated and alone as a kid. And I had no money, no job, no place to live. And I was put in that corner in order to be coerced to do what my father wanted me to do. And so I think it's true. I mean, I've been doing post-abortion ministry now for 30 years, and I've met thousands of women who have had abortions, and there's so much coercion out there, something that really isn't spoken about or brought out into the open, and it's just really terrible how they make abortion look like a woman's right when really oftentimes the woman doesn't want the abortion and she's getting pressured from other places. I always knew that my abortion bothered me. I thought I was crazy though, because you don't hear about it, especially then you didn't hear about it. Nobody was really speaking about abortion, and so I felt like I was the only one feeling like that, and so I felt crazy and alone because I had an abortion and it was bothering me when other people seemed to be grateful for it. And I started working in an inpatient rehab. A lot of the clients that I had were also women who had had abortions, and I couldn't handle it because I couldn't even find any help for myself. During that period of time, my son was going to religious instructions and he was going to be making his first penance. And I sent him because I wanted him to have that, even though I hadn't stepped foot in a church for many years by now because of my abortion. And then I got this note home saying that they wanted the parents to come in for a meeting. And I remember being terrified because I totally felt like I was doomed to hell. There was no way back. This was the worst sin in the world and it could never be forgiven. And this is the way I lived. I knew I had to go to that meeting if I wanted my son to make his first communion. And so I forced myself to go. I remember being terrified, and I walked in there and I sat down in a chair, and the priest came into the room and he started speaking about the sacrament of reconciliation. And he started mentioning all these sins that God could forgive you for. God could forgive you for adultery. God could forgive you for addiction. God could forgive you for this, for that. And all of a sudden he said, and God can forgive you for the sin of abortion. And I remember thinking, did I hear this guy right? Did he really say that God could forgive you for the sin of abortion? And I went home, and by now it was like 15 years since I had had my abortion. And I went home, and it was the first time I felt any kind of hope for myself at all. And I was terrified, but I ended up calling that priest and asking him if I could come and speak to him. And I remember when I went to the rectory and I pulled up outside, I felt like my feet were glued to the floor of my car. But I went into the rectory and I proceeded to talk to him. And I told him about my experience of abortion. And it was the first time in 15 years that I felt like somebody heard me, that he really understood what I was saying, that he had compassion for me. It was just so beautiful. And he asked me, I went to the sacrament of reconciliation. He helped me through that. And at the end, he even sang a song to me about God's mercy. And I left that rectory that night with the first little bit of hope. I had hope. I felt healed. I started going to Mass every day, trying to turn myself over to God and to change my life. I was still trying to find help for the abortion, but I just kept on praying and praying and praying about it. And one day in the house, I put the kids to bed, and I remember I went into the bathroom and I crouched down on the floor of the bathroom, and I just kept on saying over and over again, Jesus, I trust in you. I was in such pain, so filled with guilt, shame, anxiety, despair. I knew that God had forgiven me, but I just couldn't forgive myself. And I sat on the floor in the bathroom for hours and hours and hours and hours until I felt this rush go through me. And I knew in that moment that God had touched me, that he had healed me from my abortion. And I remember getting up off the floor and I went back into my room and into my bed and I fell asleep and waking up the next day and waiting for all those emotions to come back. But they didn't. And it was really the beginning of my road to healing. And did I have things to work out? Did I have things to learn? Did it take time on the journey? The journey, I don't think ever ends until you get to heaven. I think that abortion is something that you carry with you in this life. It's just not normal for a woman to take the life of her child, no matter how much you try to rationalize it or justify it. There's a place inside of you that knows it's not normal. And so, I finally, after a period of time, found a therapist who did deal with abortion and worked through the different things. And then many years later, with the Sisters of Life, I began a ministry called Entering Canaan. And it's been around now for over 25 years. Thousands of people have come through it. With the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, I also started retreats for men and for siblings of aborted babies. And it's been just so amazing to see the mercy of God work in people's lives. People that were broken and had no hope in their lives to be able to be healed and have life again and to have confidence again and to know that they're forgiven. And I just guess I want to close with just saying that they try to make it seem like abortion is a solution, that your life goes back to normal, and it never goes back to normal. There's nothing normal about abortion. They try to make it sound like you could have it and you're never going to think about it again, that it's over. But it's never over. I think of my baby every single day. I think of him differently than I did before. I used to think of it like when I died, he was going to point a finger at me and tell God, this is the person who killed me. I don't feel like that anymore. I know that it's not true. I know all the babies that are aborted, they're in heaven with God. And I think they long for the healing and reconciliation with their parents. And I think it's something that's so important that people that have had abortions need to reclaim their children on a spiritual level in order to be reconciled and to have it be the way that God wants it to be. And that one day in heaven, you'll be together again with them. And so I just encourage anyone who's suffering because of a past abortion to seek out the help that they need to heal. There's so many great ministries out there now that can assist people in working through the dynamics of abortion. I just am very grateful for what God has done in my life now, and I know that He's waiting to do it for everyone.